This past year or so, I've watched / read my fair share of romance anime stories. Some good, some bad, some promising news stories, and some news stories I promise you I will never read again. Overall, I think it's fair to say that most of the romance anime I watched this year ended up falling somewhere in between good and bad into the dreaded mid category. But one thing I can say for sure after taking in all these stories is that of all the romance anime I've watched this year, the best one was, ironically enough, not a romance anime. 𝙏𝙠 has been a standout for me this year. I think it's been a standout for a lot of people this year, and although this video is not about 𝙏𝙠, hey, where'd everybody go? It is about an anime that walked so that a weird ass show like 𝙏𝙠 could do its thing in the present day. You see this dude right here? This is Masaki Yuasa, a Japanese screenwriter / animator / director / GOAT whose work I've become slightly obsessed with over the past 365 days. The boy Yuasa has this really distinct style of storytelling, both visually and narratively, that evokes something deep inside of me, bruh. Pause. Do you remember the feeling of being like 8 years old and falling asleep while watching Cartoon Network, only to half wake up at 4 a.m. to some weird ass Adult Swim tweak shit on your screen? Yeah, that's how it feels to watch a Masaki Yuasa film, bro. Slightly traumatizing, but like also undeniably enthralling. In 2013, Yuasa and one of his animator GOAT buddies named Eun-Young Choi linked up to establish an animation studio called Science Saru. And in 2024, as many of you may know, Science Saru would go on to release 𝙏𝙠, one of anime's biggest breakout hits of the year. Now 𝙏𝙠, cool, great, love it, but in today's video, we're gonna turn back the clock a bit. We're gonna go way back in time, all the way back to 2006, when Yuasa and Choi were still collaborators on a project at Studio Madhouse, a project known today as Kemonozume. Now, I call Kemonozume a lot of things before I'd call it a romance anime. The first of which is weird. This show is very fucking weird. Visually weird. Narratively weird. If you watch this shit past episode 2, nigga, you're officially weird. Congratulations. Perhaps because of this aforementioned weirdness, the next word that I use to describe this show is elusive. You're not going to be able to find Kemonozume on any of your traditional anime streaming platforms. Netflix and them won't touch this show with a 20-foot pole, most likely because of the uncensored anime titties, to be fair, and it's because of this elusiveness that I'm making this video. I like this shit. I think you might like this shit, and I mean, hey, if this video about an obscure ass anime popped up on your YouTube homepage and you clicked on it, I mean, shit, we're already halfway there at this point, you know what I'm saying? Being in a relationship these past 2 years has taught me a lot about being in a relationship, go figure, but it also helped me better contextualize a gripe that I have with the way that most romance anime are structured. You see, based on my anecdotal observations, I would say that if a long-term romantic relationship was a timeline, it looks something like this, with the front subsection of the timeline being like the initial spark phase where everything's about infatuation, anticipation, puppy love, discovery, all that great shit. And the much larger second subsection of the timeline is about literally anything and everything else that can happen in a relationship. Now, personally, I feel like the latter section of this timeline tends to be the more interesting section from a storytelling perspective, because you don't really get to know the true essence of a relationship until you've reached this phase. But for some reason, I mean, we know the reason, niggas be lonely. But for some reason, most romance anime seem obsessed with inverting this timeline so that 99.9% of the show is spent watching two chuckleheads chase after each other to no avail, only to finally get together on the back like 2% of the series runtime. Like, I'm not gonna lie, bruh, watching too much romance anime will really get a nigga sick in the head, cause it's like, yo, why won't you two just kiss already? We are on season 2, episode 11. I'm going to, anywho, before I start tweaking out, Kemonozume as a whole is like one long fuck you to all these overplayed, quite frankly annoying anime tropes. The show is ugly, but it's intentionally ugly. It's artistically ugly. It leans into this ugliness and uses it to its advantage, creating an ambiance around the series that just feels different than what's been accepted as the norm within anime. As for the love story that's being told within Kemonozume, shit, what do you know? We finally get an anime that explores what love looks like after you dedicate yourself to somebody. What do you do when that infatuation wears off? What do you do when life's IRL struggles struggles start to set in. What do you do when your girlfriend tries to eat you and your brother wants to kill your girlfriend? Hey yo, Kemonozume explores all that and more, but above all else, above the aesthetic, above the artistry, above the commentary even, Kemonozume is just raw as hell, dog. Like, we got hella drama, hella violence, hella sex, and I mean, you know, what more could a guy really ask for out of a show? Besides, you know, actually being accessible to people who want to watch this show outside of Japan. Well, I think I might actually have a solution to that problem. Hear me out for a second. You see, the problem with trying to access quote-unquote obscure anime like this one, actually, this isn't even an issue just limited to obscure anime. That's really the crazy part. Like, let's talk about Frieren, for example. One of the most popular anime in the world as of last year. You know, one of the most popular anime of last year. If I go to my browser right now, right, and I open up Netflix, okay, and I go to search and type in Frieren Beyond Journey's End. No Frieren, right? We got Dungeon Meshi, we got Arcane, we got Dandadan, all three of which are great shows, okay? I won't take that away from them, but I don't see no Frieren. Now here's the kicker. Netflix as a company actually does have Frieren in their library, but because of licensing and business stuff, which is entirely out of our control as viewers, by the way, as someone who lives in not Japan, you're blocked off from viewing Frieren on Netflix. This is where today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN, really comes in handy. Surfshark is great for anime fans like you and I because it essentially allows you to change your virtual location to just about any country you can think of. So boom, let's go back to the browser, right? No Frieren, Frieren is sad, you're sad, I'm sad, it sucks. But then if we open up Surfshark VPN, do a little bit of location changing. All right, you see I'm in Japan now. If I go and reload, search up Frieren Beyond Journey's End, boom, look at it, right there, Frieren Beyond Journey's End. All 28 episodes, fresh for the viewing on your own time because I'm not catching that copyright claim. Now, Frieren is happy, you're happy, I'm happy, and you can finally get to see the hype around Frieren. Beyond just offering location changing though, Surfshark VPN is just generally good for your safety when browsing online. If you're doing things like accessing your bank account through your browser or, you know, utilizing public Wi-Fi when you're at like a library or coffee shop, you should probably be protecting your data, and Surfshark VPN is one of the best ways out there that you can do so. The great thing about the deal that I'm offering you today is that it's entirely risk-free. By clicking on the link in my description, you can try out Surfshark VPN with a 30-day money-back guarantee, meaning that you have a whole month to test out its usefulness for yourself before you even actually commit to using it. And if you do decide to commit to using it long term, my link provides you with 4 free months on the house. So at this point, it's like, you know, what are you waiting for? Frieren Season 2? Thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. And now back to the video, back to Yuka and Toshihiko and Rie, that whole love triangle mess. It's a lot, bro. It's a lot. Let's start off with a bit of background lore, alright? Long ago, there was a man and a woman that loved each other very much. The woman was said to be sacrificed to the gods of this verse, but right before she was sacrificed, the man came and saved her, attempting to stage an escape so that his lover could escape her sacrificial fate. Enraged at the gall of these mere humans, the gods, who had been cheated out of a sacrifice, decided to retaliate, using their god magic to turn these two rebels into flesh-eating monsters. And so as flesh-eating monsters, the man and the woman, I mean, they go around eating flesh, they go around devouring humans. Eventually these two go on to reproduce, and then those offspring reproduce, and then boom, so on and so forth, until we have an entire population of flesh eaters running around giving humanity the business. Mankind is resilient though, and so eventually they fight back, developing a sword technique called the Kifuken, which they use to slay these flesh eaters by cutting off their arms. Years go by, decades, centuries, millennia even. We don't really know exactly how long the war between humanity and the flesh eaters lasted, but what we do know is that in the present day, the flesh eaters are almost entirely extinct, and they mostly live hidden amongst humanity within their human forms on like some Tokyo Ghoul type shit. Likewise, because there's not many flesh eaters to be dealt with anymore, the Kifuken technique has gone all but obsolete, and its practice is currently relegated to one singular dojo in Japan that goes and handles the flesh eaters on the rare occasion that they do pop up. We cut to a battle between the Kifuken and one of these flesh eaters. The Kifuken are jumping the hell out of this nigga like 30-on-1. They cut off one of his arms before leading him outside to their ace, who cuts off his second arm. This ace, a man named Toshihiko, gets ready to deliver the finishing blow, but as the flesh eater is charging him, he has a flashback to a woman introducing herself as his mother, and this flashback causes Toshihiko to literally shit himself. Again, bro, don't say I didn't warn you about this show, bro. Like, if you're gonna leave, now is the time to leave, bro. Thanks for watching, but yeah, bro, it only gets weirder from here. But because Toshihiko is stalled by his dookie, the flesh eater is able to reconnect one of his arms, and he gets ready to attack Toshihiko. But right before the flesh eater could wipe Toshihiko off the map, the rest of the squad comes to Toshihiko's defense, and they take the flesh eater up off the map for him. We cut back to the Kifuken dojo later that night, and we get a look at this old head who's being patched up by this young woman. This old head is a man named Juzo. He's Toshihiko's father and the current patriarch slash director of the Kifuken. The young woman is a girl named Rie. She's Toshihiko's ex-fiancée and the only current female member of the Kifuken. Although Rie is technically a swordsman by training, they basically got her relegated to doing all the household slash medical tasks, basically anything that isn't the actual slaying of the flesh eaters. Juzo is talking to Rie though, and he's like, hey, you know, Rie, you don't really have to stay here. Like, you're 27 years old, you're no longer engaged to Toshihiko, you should go, live your life, go live a life outside the dojo. But Rie, she's just happy being at the dojo, bro. You see, the dojo is all she's ever known since she was a kid, and plus she's still high-key in love with Toshihiko, even though they're no longer engaged. We then cut to a meeting between Juzo and 8 of the more senior members of the Kifuken. One of the members, who looks like Morty from Rick and Morty, explains to Juzo that he's concerned about the uptick in flesh eaters recently. Apparently these past few months, not only have there been more flesh eaters, but they've also gotten bigger and stronger. Juzo was like, word? Well, there's not much we can do besides lock in and do what we're already doing. Keep fighting the monsters how we've been doing it. And Juzo's other son, his stepson named Kazuma, is like, well, Pops, you see, that's actually not entirely true. There is some new shit that we can do to handle these monsters better. Kazuma and Morty go on to give this presentation on a new technology that they've been developing. It's basically like this mech suit called the Buster suit that they can supposedly use to fight with the flesh eaters on equal footing. Now, Pops, he's not fucking with the Buster suit, right? For one, the Kifuken does not have the resources to produce the suit on their own, meaning they would have to outsource most of the labor, which, yeah, Pops is not all too fond of that idea. But then on top of the resources issue, Pops is the type to value tradition over innovation, and so yeah, in his mind, running around with giant mech suits goes against their title as martial artists. Pops dismisses the rest of the seniors so that it's just him and his sons in the room. Kazuma is understandably pissed that Pops isn't budging on his proposition, and when Toshihiko tries to stand up for Pops' ideals, Kazuma is like, I know Dookie Boy not over here trying to talk to me, bro. That's why I had to save you out there on the battlefield today, since you wanted to poop your pants in the middle of the squabble again. These three argue for a bit longer before Kazuma storms off in frustration, and as he's walking off, he passes Rie. Seeing Rie, he's like, yo, maybe Boo Boo Boy should focus more on this woman that actually cares about him instead of focusing on his goddamn swordsmanship all the time. You see, Kazuma has feelings for Rie. That's pretty clear from the jump, and so he's kinda salty that Rie is still stuck up on his brother who rejected her to focus on inheriting the Kifuken dojo. The next day, Kazuma decides that he's had enough of his family's tomfoolery, and so he decides to challenge his brother to a 1v1 sword squabble in order to see who will be the next leader of the Kifuken. Rie comes out to see these two standing off, and she's like, both of y'all chill, and Kazuma cuts her off. He's like, nah, Rie, this has to be done. This is between me and my brother. As this is happening, a random peach somehow rolls onto the battlefield, and this little monkey starts to run after the peach. Kazuma kicks the peach out of the way as the monkey is running after it, and not liking the disrespect, the monkey proceeds to jump Kazuma, absolutely embarrassing this nigga. He gives him 2 black eyes, he pulls the screws out of his sword, which causes it to fall apart, he pulls this nigga's pants down down to his ankles. Like, he is absolutely humiliating, bro. After embarrassing Kazuma in front of the hose, the monkey runs off into the distance, and for some reason, Toshihiko decides to chase after the monkey, thinking that the creature is trying to tell him something. Toshihiko ends up chasing the monkey all the way down to the beach that sits below their dojo, and as he's chasing the monkey across the shore, he suddenly looks up to see a woman skydiving above him. She too is about to land on the beach near the monkey. When this woman lands on the sand, she starts playing around with the monkey because, I mean, come on, bro, who doesn't like cute little monkeys? But we get a look back over at Toshihiko, and this man is just immediately infatuated with this skydiving woman that had landed in front of him. For one, she looks smack like the quote-unquote mom that keeps popping into his head during his flashbacks. But on top of that, this woman is also bad as hell, bro, and Toshihiko, who's lived all of his life in a perpetual dojo sausage party, yeah, he's feeling some things that he's never felt before, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. A mysterious man's voice comes from behind this woman, calling her by the name Yuka. The man is chastising Yuka for skydiving during the nighttime since it's dangerous, but because we're seeing this all from Toshihiko's perspective that's entirely locked in on Yuka, we don't really get to see what this mysterious man looks like. Now, I understand being attracted to somebody, right? But this nigga Toshihiko starts utterly tweaking out over this girl Yuka, bro. At first, he stands on the beach for a couple hours after she leaves, just replaying the image of Yuka in his head. But when he finally does decide to head back to the crib, Toshihiko starts tweaking out even further, bro. He starts seeing Yuka's face replace the faces of literally everyone who he interacts with. He tries to hit the gym to forget about Yuka and like lock back in on his training. No dice. He tries to sleep it all off and just wake up normally the next morning. Again, no dice. It gets to the point where out of pure desperation, Toshihiko runs back to the beach where he met Yuka, and to his surprise, Yuka is there as well, on the exact same type of timing that he's on, bro. It turns out over the past day, they had both been mutually obsessing over one another, and yeah, the two of them end up finding a hotel where they start ravenously doing what mutually attracted people do. But as this is going down, we get a closer look at Yuka, and yeah, bro, Yuka is a flesh eater. During the following days, Toshihiko starts to consciously skip out on his training in order to spend more time with Yuka. The two of them go on this skydiving date, then they end up going on this shopping date. Yuka got this nigga walking around the dojo in Hawaiian shirts and shit, and long story short, Toshihiko is not worried about no damn Kifuken anymore. He is entirely locked into the thought of being with Yuka. We cut to a mission where Toshihiko once again shits himself during a critical moment, but instead of, maybe focusing on how to not poop his pants during life or death situations, Toshihiko seems more focused on texting Yuka mid-mission. Like, this dude is really on a whole different type of simpery right now, and it's getting to the point where he's putting both himself and his comrades in danger with his behavior. We then cut to another date that Toshihiko has with Yuka. They're at an airport this time, weird ass date, but while he's at this airport with Yuka, the woman starts very cryptically hinting at the fact that she's a flesh eater. She's like, yeah, guys tend to stop liking me once they really get to know me, so on and so forth. Basically just saying things that kinda hints at her being a flesh eater, but like keeping up this veil of plausible deniability and not stating it outright to his face. Toshihiko doesn't seem to pay much mind to what Yuka is saying, right? He's still madly infatuated with her, and so yeah, he kinda just brushes off what the woman is saying is normal everyday insecurity and proceeds to make out with her again. Now, one thing that's important to note about Toshihiko, because this probably hasn't come across in my commentary so far, but one thing that's important to note about Toshihiko is the fact that he is by far the strongest swordsman within the Kifuken under his father. Yes, he's still Mr. Dookie Boy, and yes, he still has the bad habit of getting an upset stomach when fighting flesh eaters, but as far as raw swordsmanship is concerned, Toshihiko is the strongest succession candidate when it comes to leading the Kifuken. Pops pulls Toshihiko up for a spar that night in order to see how strong he's gotten, right? To sort of gauge to what extent the man is ready to take over the Kifuken, and yeah, Pops whoops Toshihiko's ass, bro. I ain't never seen a nigga get, that's a lie. I was about to say I'd never seen anyone get their ass beat by an old man, but y'all know how old niggas be in anime, bro. But as this is going on, we get a look at Yuka, who's getting ready for her next date with Toshihiko, and she's basically telling the mystery man from earlier to fuck off, right? It's like this big brolic ass nigga that she's talking to, and she's like, bro, leave me alone. I don't rock with you anymore, bro. Like, go somewhere. And the dude is like, man, fuck you. I'm the only one who could truly love you. Blah, 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 blah. Just a whole bunch of toxic shit between the two of them. So yeah, we don't really know what's going on between Yuka and this man that's apparently her ex right now, but more on this plot line will be revealed later. Anywho, Toshihiko and Yuka have another date that night, right? They get another hotel room, and after they do what they do in the hotel room, Toshihiko looks at Yuka and he's like, hey, can I introduce you to my father? I want to make this official. I think they're like basically engaged at this point actually. Yuka seems excited to meet his father, right? And everything seems all fine and dandy for a bit. But as Toshihiko is walking back home the next morning, he gets a call from Kazuma, his brother, and Kazuma is on the other end of the phone like, yeah, hey, Pops is dead. Cut to the funeral that they're having for Pops, right? Yuka pulls up and signs into the funeral because Toshihiko invited her as a guest. But when the dude at the front desk sees Yuka's face, he starts absolutely tweaking, bro. Like, he sees Yuka and he somehow already knows that something is up. He looks down at her name on the sign-in sheet after Yuka walks off and he's like, is that her daughter? I didn't know that she had a daughter. I thought I was tripping. Who exactly she is in this context, like who exactly this man is referring to when he's talking about someone having a daughter, we don't know yet, but we'll find out soon enough. Funeral processions proceed, you know, everything is going smooth enough. Rie sees Yuka's engagement ring and she gets a bit pensive, but as Yuka and Toshihiko were talking at the front of the room, Onion Head, who was sitting at the sign-in sheet, comes up to Kazuma and he's like, yo gang, we might have a problem on our hands right now. One of the other dudes invites Yuka to this special dinner that they apparently prepared to meet her. And once Yuka is gone, all of Toshihiko's boys pull up on them and they're like, hey gang, we think your girl might be a flesh eater. Now Toshihiko is in disbelief upon hearing this, right? And as he's making his way to the quote-unquote dinner that they set up to meet Yuka, Rie stops him in the hallway to adjust his collar. Except old girl is not actually adjusting his collar. I mean, to be fair, she is technically adjusting his collar, but she's mainly slipping a tracking device under his collar, which is like the real reason that she stopped him in the first place. We cut to the dinner, which is, you know, actually a trap to get Yuka to transform into a flesh eater and then jump the shit out of her. But before the plan actually kicks off, we get this interaction between Yuka and Rie that's just so catty and passive aggressive, man. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to have the ex-fiance sit next to the fiance at the father's funeral, but anywho, Kazuma eventually starts accusing Yuka of being the flesh eater that killed their father, and yeah, shit starts to escalate very quickly from there. Turns out some of Toshihiko's boys roofied Yuka's drink with this drug that forces her to transform into her flesh eater form. And the moment the transformation starts to occur, everyone pulls their weapons out from under the table and gets ready to spin the block for Pops right then and there. Now Toshihiko, he was supposed to be a part of the get back plan as well. That's what all of his boys were talking about with him earlier, back in the sanctuary. But instead of helping Kazuma and the rest of the gang take out Yuka, Toshihiko actually raises his blade against the rest of the Kifukin in order to protect Yuka from any of their attacks. Kazuma is like, Dookie boy, I know you're not dead ass right now. And Toshihiko's like, oh word? Then come over here and see if I don't send you to go meet Pops right now if you try something. As everyone in this room is deadlocked in a stalemate, Yuka's ex rolls through and starts trying to stage his own mission to save Yuka. WX, I suppose? Maybe? I don't know. But as the ex is distracting the Kifukin's forces at the front of the dojo, Toshihiko takes this opportunity to escape and he jumps out the back of the building with Yuka before landing on a train that just so happened to be chugging along on the tracks underneath the dojo. Toshihiko locks eyes with Kazuma as the train speeds off into the distance. From this point onward, Toshihiko has officially chosen Yuka over the Kifukin. An unspecified amount of time passes. I'm assuming at least a few hours to a day have passed so far, but as of right now, Yuka and Toshihiko are still on this train to Lord knows where. While they're on the train, this seemingly random dude comes up to Toshihiko and starts talking to him, but come to find out, this random dude is actually like a part of the Kifukin cleanup crew or something? I don't know, but he knows Toshihiko, and when he sees Yuka, this suspicious expression suddenly spreads across his face. Now Toshihiko, he's not taking any risks right now, bro. He's already on the run, he's already with a flesh eater on top of that. No need to let this little bald ass nigga even get the chance to sell his bag, and so Toshihiko hits him with like this pressure 6-point paralysis technique that forces the old bald dude to be frozen in place where he stands. As Toshihiko and Yuka are running off, 2 other men who are on the cleanup crew try chasing after them, but Toshihiko, again, he's not playing with these niggas right now, and so he pulls out his katana and he's like, hey, I'm gonna need y'all two to take a step back right now, unless you want to catch this blade work. The 2 cleanup crew members obviously don't want to catch none of that Toshihiko blade work, and so they end up letting Toshihiko and Yuka escape off the train and go about their business. The couple ends up getting another hotel room where they once again try to do the deed despite actively being on the run. But this time when they try to do it, they keep running into this problem where Yuka transforms into flesh eater mode every time she gets too aroused. The show actually makes a decently large plot point off of this dynamic right here. Like, the 2 end up spending a solid chunk of time exploring the sort of intimacy woes that these 2 have as a, I guess, interspecies couple. I'm just not going to talk about that aspect of the show that much because there's a lot of uncensored titties in this show, and YouTube guidelines, yeah, you get the vibes. But just know that the intimacy problems are there with these 2, and it constantly is this underlying stressor on their relationship. Anywho, as the 2 of them are continuing to go about their night, still on the run, this giant titan of a man ends up peeking his head through their window so that he can look into their room. Apparently, Mr. Titan over here is a private investigator that was sent to find these 2, and I mean, yeah, his big ass is rummaging through the city trying to locate Yuka and Toshihiko like a giant kid trying to locate his lost toys. Anywho, realizing that they can't stay in the city for long, the 2 end up traveling to Yuka's grandpa's old house where they spend the night. And I don't know if Yuka secretly comes from crazy wealth or something, but this nigga's house is fucking stacked, bro. Like, the 2 of them end up spending the night in this luxurious ass Tony Stark ass mansion, which, like, I mean, shit, if you're gonna be on the run, you might as well do it in style, right? But as the 2 of them are having dinner in this mansion, Yuka gets tipsy, which leads to her getting frisky, and yeah, just like the last time these 2 tried to engage, more horny only leads to more problems. And it's at this point where Yuka is now just like, yo, I'm not even gonna lie, me being in your life is only gonna put you in more danger, whether that be from me or whether that be from the Kifukin. And so she's talking to Toshihiko and she's like, and so maybe you should just cut my arms off and kill me right now so that neither of us have to deal with this shit in the long run. Toshihiko is obviously vehemently against killing his fiance, but back at the dojo, Kazuma and them are more than happy to do so for him. In spearheading the effort to kill Toshi's fiance, I'm probably just gonna call him Toshi from now on, but spearheading the effort to kill Toshi's fiance is the mech suit that Pops was so desperately disapproving of before he passed. Now this next episode, we're on episode 4 of 13 for reference, so a little under a quarter of the way there, give or take. But this next episode is like an exposition episode, right? Flashbacks, context, basically just shit you need to know moving forward so that the rest of the series makes sense, because a lot of the series from this point forward will be calling back to the info that we're given in this episode specifically. And so yeah, for starters, Yuka most definitely killed that nigga Pops. Like, she murdered him in cold blood. That was 100% her doing. We get a look at the night that Yuka walked down on Pops, the exact moment that it happened, and upon seeing the woman right before his death, Pops mutters the name Harumi. Now let's flash back to Pops' heyday, right? Let's flash back to when Pops was around Toshi's age. The big 3 of the Kifukin at the time were Pops, whose name is Juzo, Onion Head from the funeral, whose name is Uba, and a third nigga named Jin, who we have yet to meet in the present. Now these 3 were thick as thieves back in the day, right? They had a rivalry regarding who would inherit the Kifukin, but they were all still basically brothers to one another. They were all still locked in with each other's best interest in mind. One day, while they were out minding their own business, riding motorcycles and being cool and shit, they ended up saving this woman who was getting harassed by a bunch of weird harasser niggas. And long story short, they ended up taking this woman in at the Kifukin dojo. This woman, whose name is Harumi, is Yuka's mother. In case, you couldn't tell from all their shared features, they basically have the same face. I'm a bit unclear when it comes to understanding exactly at what point in the timeline Yuka was born, but I think it's implied that Yuka had already been born born at this point, and that Harumi basically abandoned her daughter to go live at the Kifuken dojo. Now Harumi was basically like the Rie of the past, right? Similar to Rie's role in the modern day Kifuken, Harumi brought some much needed femininity to the Kifuken sausage party back in the day. Everyone in the dojo seemed to be fond of her presence there. Juzo in particular fell mutually in love with Harumi, and yeah, for a while everything was cool. Now Harumi actually didn't know what the fuck the Kifuken was doing, right? I guess she just naively assumed it was a bunch of homeboys living together and playing with swords and shit. But when she eventually comes to find out that the Kifuken is a flesh-eater genocide organization, she, as a flesh eater herself, is like, oh hell nah bro, I gotta get out of here. She pulls up our three musketeers one night and explains to them the truth about her situation. She explains the fact that she's a flesh eater and whatnot. She's like, I'm sorry, I swear I didn't know this was what y'all were on around here. I gotta go. At first, Juzo and them are kind of taken aback by her confession, right? I mean, flesh eater living in the Kifuken dojo is crazy, but the three of them ultimately decide to trust Harumi and protect her identity, thus allowing her to continue to live among the Kifuken for the foreseeable future. A few months pass, and now we're getting into succession season, right? The Kifuken elder tells our trio that he wants to have an exhibition match between the three of them to see who's gonna inherit the dojo. And upon hearing this, Jin is like, hey, if that's the case, can you teach us the Kifuken secret technique so that we can all compete with each other at maximum power? The elder is like, yeah, sure, I'll teach y'all, but I would advise against trying to do this technique IRL because in the entire history of the Kifuken, no one has managed to pull off this technique and live to tell the tale. The elder goes on to explain that the Kifuken's theoretical ultimate technique is a technique that's called the Kemonozume. The Kemonozume basically involves cutting off your own arms and replacing them with flesh eater arms so that you become like a human flesh eater super soldier hybrid. The problem with doing this though is that a flesh eater's essence lives within their arms. It's the reason the Kifuken goes after their arms in the first place when they're trying to slay flesh eaters. And so by incorporating flesh eater arms into your own being, you're basically opening yourself up to being taken over by the flesh eater instincts, which, you know, obviously isn't a fun time. Now, like the elder mentioned earlier, no one in the millennia-long history of the Kifuken has managed to suppress the flesh-eater instincts when attempting the Kemonozume. And so as far as the technique is concerned right now, the Kemonozume is really nothing more than a one-way ticket to losing your humanity and becoming a flesh-eater. After explaining all this, the elder is like, yeah, so with all that said, you probably don't want to attempt the Kemonozume, but honestly, y'all are strong enough without it, so, you know, just go out there and give it your best. I'm sure you'll do fine. Not long after, the day of the exhibition match finally arrives. 𝙏𝙖𝙡 actually drops out of the running right before the match can start because even though he's nice with the sword, he recognizes that he's not on the level of his two homeboys who are legit prodigies. With only two swordsmen left in the running, Jin and Juzo square off to see who's gonna inherit the dojo, and after clashing blades, Jin emerges as the victor of their duel. Kinda. Turns out, Juzo threw the match. He basically let Jin win, and when Jin presses him trying to figure out why the hell he would do such a thing, cause Jin took him throwing their fated rivalry match as disrespect. But when Jin presses Juzo to figure out why, Juzo explains that Harumi was pregnant with his child, and that there was no way he was going to be the leader of the Kifuken while simultaneously having a flesh-eater child. Jin is like, oh hell nah bro, you threw away all those years of dedication to the sword for a woman? And Juzo looks back at him, dead in the eye, and he's like, you damn right I did. And I don't regret anything about it either. A few months pass and Juzo demotes himself to training the younger members of the Kifuken, while Jin simultaneously gets promoted to his role as the leader of the dojo. Around this time, Juzo starts bringing Toshihiko around to come live at the dojo. Apparently, Toshihiko was Juzo's first child that he had with his ex-wife, and so now that he had more free time on his hands, Juzo wanted to start the process of getting his son acclimated with his stepmother, as well as, you know, get him to start training to become a Kifuken warrior. Now, for those of you who are keeping track of the family dynamics at play here, yes, this does imply that Toshihiko is technically engaged to his stepsister. However, I feel like it's not as weird as it sounds, since, like, okay, hear me out, bruh. Hear me out. They technically didn't know each other before meeting at the beach, right? There's no shared genetics between the two of them. They don't view each other in like a sibling manner. They didn't grow up together. Really, it's just a freak coincidence that Toshihiko and Yuka happen to have parents that were also Okay, actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, it is kind of weird, but I don't think these two ever actually realized within canon that their respective parents were, you know, also together, you know what I'm saying? And so it kind of just ends up being this weird fun fact, right? Like this weird dose of dramatic irony for the audience that doesn't really impact the story itself. Anywho, Jin ends up having a daughter named 𝙏𝙖. Yes, that 𝙏𝙖, the ex-fiance of Toshihiko, and 𝙏𝙧, the third member of the trio who dropped out of the succession fight. He ends up creating a new branch of the Kifuken that would serve as like an intelligence agency to help the dojo. Basically like the Kifuken FBI, so to speak. Now, we're gonna time skip forward a bit more here so that we can get through this flashback in a timely manner, because this script is already getting long as hell, holy shit. But long story short, Jin continued to grow increasingly power hungry as time went on, and this ultimately culminated in him cutting off his arm so that he could attempt the Kemonozume. Yeah, this bid for power did not work out well at all. Just as the elder had warned them years ago, Jin lost himself to the flesh eater instincts, and so now the Kifuken is in a pretty big pickle, seeing as though their leader has basically just become one of the monsters that they are sworn to destroy, and a very powerful one of those monsters at that. 𝙏𝙖, upon hearing about Jin, he ends up feeling guilty for his friend's fate, right? I guess he thinks that by selling the exhibition match back in the day, he low-key kicked off Jin's downward spiral, and after 𝙏𝙖 starts feeling guilty, Harumi starts feeling extra guilty because she feels like the root of 𝙏𝙖's problems are all coming from her being a part of his life. Fueled by this strange amalgamation of guilt and love, Harumi and 𝙏𝙖 end up concocting a plan where they both chop off their arms so that 𝙏𝙖 can perform the Kemonozume technique with Harumi's arms. The plan actually ends up working out, right? 𝙏𝙖 is able to tame Harumi's arms, possibly due to the pre-existing chemistry that they had as a couple, and once 𝙏𝙖's strength is super boosted by the flesh eater arms, he pulls up on Jin to give him the fair fade that he's been desperately fiending for all these years. 𝙏𝙖 and Jin both knock each other out in the midst of their battle, and when 𝙏𝙖 finally awakens, he's back at the Kifuken dojo with the entire dojo emanating around him. All of the Kifuken members have been slaughtered. Harumi has been slaughtered. The only surviving members of the dojo are 𝙏𝙖, Toshihiko, and his younger brother, who hid out in the dojo attic while it was all being set ablaze. Now all this right here, basically everything that happened from Harumi's amputation onward, this is the root cause of Toshihiko's trauma. It's the reason why he's always pooping himself when he has to kill a flesh eater. It's the reason why he's always flashing back to his stepmom that we now know as Harumi. Yeah, it's all because of this night right here. I think he's just repressed the memories over time, and so he's not consciously aware of how they're affecting him in the present day. Speaking of things affecting Toshi in the present day, we cut back to the present day, and Toshi's relationship with Yuka is really starting to become strained as the days go by. The couple's inability to do anything remotely intimate without Yuka transforming into a monster is low-key forcing them to see each other beyond their initial sexual attraction / infatuation. And even though it's still fair to say that they have feelings for one another, those feelings are definitely being put to the test due to how stressful their current situation is. Basically, the puppy love phase is over, and it's time to see what type of timing these two are really on when it comes to being with each other. Back at the Kifuken dojo, things are also getting shaken up in a pretty major way. You see, Kazuma is currently the de facto leader of the Kifuken since Toshi is out eloping with the flesh eater, and under the guidance of 𝙏𝙧, aka Onion Head from back in the day, Kazuma is trying to move the Kifuken in a much different direction than the one they were moving in under 𝙏𝙖's leadership. Long story short, Kazuma and 𝙏𝙧 are attempting to modernize the Kifuken in the way that they see fit. They want to start implementing new technology into their fighting style. They want to collaborate with the government and other investors so that they can have more resources. They want to start hunting down flesh eaters. So like, instead of just being reactionary to when flesh eaters attack, they want to actively take the initiative to hunt them down regardless of if they've killed anybody or not. And most importantly, the two of them want the Kifuken to get the credit and the glory for all of the work that they put in. After announcing this change in the Kifuken leadership structure, a lot more money starts flowing through the Kifuken's pockets since they have actual external investors now with like bread. And with the new money that the Kifuken fighters are seeing, one member in particular, a dude named 𝙏𝙧, gets himself addicted to buying escorts at the local red light district. Now, like you'd expect from a grown man who's literally never interacted with a woman in his life, 𝙏𝙧 quickly becomes infatuated with this one escort in particular named Miko, who so happens to be a flesh eater. And yeah, to make a long story short, Umeda tries to pull a Toshi with Miko, but unlike Yuka, Miko does not actually love him back, and so he ends up getting strung along until he ultimately gets devoured by the woman who he fell in love with. And I don't mean that in the good way. When Kazuma sees that another member of the Kifuken has attempted to run off with a flesh eater, he starts tweaking, right? He's like, yo, why do these flesh eater women keep stealing our members? And while Kazuma is kind of frazzled and distressed from the whole situation, Uba convinces him to eat these octopus balls that he bought from his restaurant for some reason. Yes, Uba owns a restaurant. That nigga is rich as fuck. This is an important moment because Juzo, Kazuma's father, had explicitly banned him from consuming octopus under any circumstance. And not long after he starts eating these octopus balls, we notice that Kazuma's hair and eyes have shifted to a different color. The same blonde and blue color that's characteristic of only 2 other characters in this story. So yeah, turns out Kazuma is the half flesh eater son that Juzo and Harumi had all those years ago, and for some reason him eating the octopus that Uba gave him was the catalyst needed to reveal his dormant flesh eater genes. As we the audience are discovering the truth about Kazuma's nature, Rie happens to stumble upon a secret room that Juzo used to store all of his Harumi memorabilia, and by rummaging through the secret room, Rie basically starts to tap into all the secret information that Juzo tried to keep hidden from everyone else. We cut back to Yuka and Toshihiko, and the 2 of them are still on the run, sorta aimlessly traveling from place to place and only stopping when they find like an abandoned building that they can use to set up camp for the night. One morning, after waking up and checking her little pocket calendar, Yuka realizes that today is her birthday, and so while Toshihiko is out in the woods training with the monkey that randomly somehow tracked them down, Yuka decides to head to the local town so that she can buy groceries in order to cook herself a special birthday dinner. That night, Toshihiko and Yuka are enjoying this sweet little birthday dinner, doing their little couple thing, when Yuka, somewhat tipsy, decides to ask Toshihiko about the pressure point attack that he used to paralyze that one guy back on the train. Toshihiko's like, oh yeah, that's this secret Kifuken technique, you know, it took years of training, blah blah blah. And Yuka's like, oh word? Say less, can you teach it to me? Now Toshihiko, understandably so, he doesn't expect Yuka to be able to pull off such an advanced technique with only a few minutes of training. And so he actually complies and teaches her the technique, or at least where exactly the pressure points are that she needs to aim for. At first, Yuka is unable to pull off the technique because, again, super advanced technique, first time trying it, you get the vibes. But the second time she tries to perform the technique, out of pure dumb beginner's luck, she manages to paralyze Toshihiko the same way that he paralyzed the dude back on the train. Now at first Yuka's all excited that she managed to pull it off, right? She's like, yippee! But the timing in which she paralyzed Toshihiko happens to be the absolute worst timing possible. And while Toshihiko is sitting there unable to move or talk, he notices the giant private investigator from earlier has pulled up on their hiding spot. Now, to make a long story short, Yuka ends up charming this investigator, whose name is Saiji, into becoming friends with her and Toshihiko. And Saiji, instead of following through with the investigation that he was assigned, decides to let Yuka and Toshihiko slide as sort of like a birthday gift to Yuka and a thank you for letting him celebrate her birthday with the 2 of them. Side note, Yuka also bought Toshihiko an adult diaper at the grocery store because I guess she wanted to help her man with his fecal difficulties. I mean, it's kind of sweet when you think about it, kind of gross, but you know, kind of sweet. But anywho, after Saiji leaves, Yuka and Toshihiko hit the road once again because even though the birthday dinner was nice, the 2 of them can't really afford to stay cooped up in one place for too long, lest they want to risk getting tracked down by the Kifuken, who's still out to get them at this very moment. As the days continue to go by, the stress from constantly being on the road starts to wear down on our couple, particularly on Yuka, who isn't really fond of or accustomed to having to live uncomfortably like this day in and day out. Yuka is like, Toshihiko, can't we like stop at a restaurant every now and then so that we can have like an actual proper meal? But Toshihiko doesn't want to risk getting caught under any circumstance, and so he's like, nah bro, for now we're just gonna have to deal with these 7-Eleven hot dogs and Them nasty ass hot dogs, bro. But he's like, nah, we're gonna have to deal with these 7-Eleven hot dogs and keep it pushing until further notice. Once again, the relationship between Yuka and Toshihiko starts to feel strained at its very core. Yuka starts drinking all the time in order to cope with the depression that she's slipping into. And Toshi, in return, starts getting pissed that Yuka keeps drinking because he feels like by doing so, the woman is putting them both into an unnecessary amount of danger. Back at the dojo, things aren't going too well for Kazuma and them either. Now that they have external investors, the Kifuken is facing increased pressure to up the amount of flesh eaters that they're killing, but with the resources that they currently have at their disposal, doing so is just frankly out of their capabilities as an organization. The stress from trying to meet these unrealistic KPIs that the higher ups are setting starts to take a toll on Kazuma, who's responsible for this whole operation in the first place. Him one night, while everyone else is asleep, Rie goes into the kitchen to find Kazuma devouring raw meat out of the fridge. Those flesh eater genes are really starting to kick his ass, bro, and it's becoming harder and harder for the man to maintain his humanity after breaking his father's rule and eating Uba's octopus balls. Rie at this point is just desperate to help out how she can. She wants to feel useful, and so the next day she dons her armor for the first time in years, and she's like, hey, she's talking to Kazuma, and she's like, hey, put me on the front lines, chief. I want to be of use to the Kifuken as well. Unfortunately for Rie, Kazuma is kinda sexist. I mean, the whole organization is, you know, pretty patriarchal, obviously, but Kazuma, he's like on another level of sexism, and the man basically tells her, like, I mean, he basically tells her to get back in the kitchen. Like, he doesn't say those exact words, but the sentiment of what he's saying is basically just that. Rie is like, fine. That's how he wants to play it? Say less. I'm gonna start doing my own thing without consulting Kazuma. And the woman proceeds to pull up on Morty and have him geolocate the tracker that she had slipped onto Toshihiko's collar a few days back. Apparently, Rie and Morty had been keeping the whole tracker thing a secret from Kazuma since, you know, bro has been tweaking lately. Rie ends up tracking Toshi down to this abandoned amusement park where him and Yuka are currently hiding out. While they're in the amusement park, the two of them try to do the deed, but just like last time, they don't last long before Yuka transforms into a giant flesh eater, and yeah, both of them are once again left unsatisfied due to their species incompatibility, so to speak. Toshihiko decides to have a serious talk with Yuka, and he's like, yo, Yuka, you can't keep getting drunk like this every day. All it does is increase your chances of transforming. But Yuka, she's like, you say that, but how am I supposed to keep living this shitty ass life on the run without any type of alcohol to help me get through it? Before this conversation can escalate into another full-blown argument, Yuka gets up and walks away to get a breath of fresh air and, you know, like cool her head off. But while Yuka walks off to who knows where, a convenience store or some shit, the abandoned Ferris wheel that they were sitting in starts to move with Toshihiko still in it. Now at first Toshihiko is shocked, right? He has no idea why the Ferris wheel is suddenly moving out of nowhere. But before he can even stop to process what's going on, Rie walks into the Ferris wheel and she's like, hey Toshihiko, it's time for you to come home now. Rie tells Toshihiko the story about the other dude that fell in love with the flesh eater and got eaten. And when Toshihiko doesn't seem convinced by hearing that story, she decides to take matters into her own hands. And I mean, look, let me just put it like this. She decides to offer Toshihiko what his relationship with Yuka had been missing these past couple of days. Now look, personally speaking, I think Rie is a better partner for Toshihiko than Yuka is. I also think she's way badder than Yuka too, but that's neither here nor there, because regardless of all that, L fucking Toshihiko for cheating on his girl, bro. Like, no matter how you want to spin it, you simply can't justify what Toshihiko did here, bro. It's just foul nigga activities, and there's really no way you can respect that, in my opinion. But anywho, all this that just went down between Rie and Toshihiko is already bad enough on its own. Horrible on its own if I'm being frank about it. But to make matters worse, we cut to Yuka, who just bought a pregnancy test at a local convenience store, and sure enough, after taking this pregnancy test, that shit comes back as positive, bruh, and what may be the absolute worst timing of the entire series so far. Now the Yuka, Rie, Toshihiko love triangle that we have cooking up here, we're gonna get back to that in a second, okay? Because this particular plot point is far from over. But for now, I want to cut back to Kazuma, who is currently in a business meeting with the Kifuken's #1 investor, 𝙏𝙖. You see, 𝙏𝙖, in case you couldn't tell already, is simply not to be trusted when it comes to his involvement with the 𝙏𝙏. First, he gave Kazuma, well, first he burned down the fucking 𝙏𝙏 and killed everybody, so, you know, there's that. But then he gave Kazuma the octopus balls, which started his whole flesh eater transformation debacle. And then on top of that, now 𝙏𝙖 is basically trying to strategically usurp control of the 𝙏𝙏 by backing them into a corner on like some businessman type shit. I want you to think back to the beginning of the video when Kazuma first wanted to get the whole flesh eater mech suit buster suit idea off the ground. Remember how Juzo was super against the whole idea because it would mean relying on external investors? Well, yeah, turns out Pops was right in his hesitation to pursue mechs, because just like he had predicted, 𝙏𝙖 starts using his position as the majority shareholder in the 𝙏𝙏's finances to basically become the de facto director of the 𝙏𝙏, even though the position is still technically held by Kazuma. Now, one thing that's important to note about 𝙏𝙖 right now is the fact that in the years that had passed since his days at the dojo, the man had somehow managed to flip his 𝙏𝙏 intelligence agency into like a super multi-billion-dollar biotech conglomerate. And so after taking control of the 𝙏𝙏's finances, one of his first orders of business is to get the 𝙏𝙏 warriors to start taking these performance-enhancing drugs that his company produces. Back to Rie and them though. Her and Toshihiko are still on the Ferris wheel. You know, they're just over there talking after getting it in. The guild is finally starting to set in for Toshihiko, and when Yuka comes back to find her man bare-chested in the Ferris wheel with his ex-fiance, yeah, she's obviously pretty upset about what she can assume had just happened between the two of them. Now at first, Rie and Yuka start going at it, right? It starts off as a roast battle. They're like flaming each other's chest sizes, even though they really should be directing all this anger at Toshihiko as opposed to each other. But then this roast battle quickly escalates into what's essentially a cat fight, and yeah, Toshihiko ends up having to step between the two of them before, you know, they really start going after each other's lives. As Toshihiko is trying to de-escalate the situation between his two lovers, a flesh eater suddenly appears behind him and knocks him out cold. And when we get a look at the flesh eater that got to him, we realize that Yuka's ex from the beginning of the show has pulled up with his posse of flesh eaters, ready to take Yuka back with them, whether she wants to go or not. When Toshihiko finally comes back to consciousness, the man finds that he's been tied up in a chair with like a burlap sack over his head that's obscuring his vision. I mean, it's obscuring all of his senses, as, you know, burlap sacks tend to do. But after a few hours of being confined and having really no idea what's going on, Toshihiko hears someone else come into the room with him. Turns out the person who's coming into this room with him is Yuka. And after pulling up Toshihiko's sack enough that his mouth is exposed, the woman starts spoon feeding him his dinner for the night. Rather vindictively at that, as she's still kinda pissed about him cheating on her with Rie. As Toshihiko is getting spoon fed, the man starts desperately apologizing to Yuka. He's like, "Baby, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, blah blah blah." But as he's rambling on about how sorry he is and is trying to make amends, Yuka's ex pulls up with his posse and he's like, "Hey, I'm not even gonna lie to you right now, bro." He's this big brolic ass nigga, right? But he's like, "Hey, I'm not even gonna lie to you right now, bro. Shut your lame ass up before I rock you dead in your shit." The ex tells Yuka to leave the room so that it's just Toshi and the gang of flesh eaters by themselves. And once they're all alone with their hostage, the ex-boyfriend starts interrogating Toshihiko about the drugs that are being sold by the 𝙏𝙏. Now you gotta remember, Toshihiko isn't tapped into the current state of the 𝙏𝙏 affairs, right? He has no idea about the modernization plan spearheaded by his brother in 𝙏𝙖. He has no idea about 𝙏𝙖 using the 𝙏𝙏 to peddle prescription drugs, and so he's like, "Dog, what are you talking about, bro? The 𝙏𝙏 isn't out here selling drugs. Like, what are you going on about?" Even though Toshi is telling the truth, at least as far as his knowledge is concerned, the flesh eaters don't buy that he's being 100% honest with them. And so in order to get Toshihiko to spill the information that they think he has, they start psychologically torturing Toshihiko, chaining him up to the ceiling and making him think that his limbs are being cut off by pretending to do so while he's still blindfolded. Now look, credit where credit is due, okay? These flesh eaters actually do manage to break Toshihiko low-key. Like, they get dude to start tweaking and crying, and I mean, I'm surprised he didn't poop himself, knowing him. But as night comes along and Toshihiko finally passes out from all the stress, the ex goes to check on Yuka, who's taking a bath somehow in the middle of an abandoned building. Somehow the ex can sense that Yuka is pregnant despite her not really showing, and he's like, "Is the kid mine?" Yuka just stonewalls him. He tries again. He's like, "You know, a human like him will never be able to fully understand you, much less take care of a flesh eater child." But once again, Yuka just ignores his advances. I'm not gonna lie, Yuka's a real one for remaining loyal to Toshihiko after he's clearly demonstrated that he would not do the same for her. But after a few seconds of silence, the ex gets a phone call telling him that he's needed elsewhere in the building. And so after giving Yuka a quick peck on the lips, he goes off to handle business. Now once again, for brevity's sake, I'm gonna pick up the pace a little bit in explaining what exactly happens on this particular night. So with the help of Rie, who escaped back to the dojo after the flesh eaters pulled up at the amusement park, the Kifuken is able to track down the flesh eaters to the abandoned building that they're using as a hideout. One of the flesh eaters finds a Kifuken scout that was staking out the area, but when they bring the scout inside to try to torture him for information, they find that he is physically unable to feel pain because of the drugs that 𝙏𝙖𝙡 has the Kifuken taking before their missions. They end up leaving the scout with Toshihiko, who starts asking him about the drugs, and the scout explains to Toshihiko that thanks to the new drugs, the Kifuken warriors now have everything from increased strength to a complete inability to feel pain. Before long though, these drugs that the scout was raving about starts to wear off, and the pain from being stabbed earlier starts to kick in. Toshi looks down at the man while he's tweaking, and for a split second he sees what looks like the man transforming into a flesh eater. But before he has any time to take in what's going on before his very eyes, the wall gets blown off the flesh eater's hideout, and a Kifuken helicopter starts scanning the interior of the building. Kazuma, 𝙏𝙧, Morty, and Rie are all aboard this helicopter, looking for Toshihiko. Kazuma deploys a couple of mech suits to go storm the building, along with the dozens of Kifuken warriors that are hiding out in the bushes and whatnot. As the mechs and the warriors enter the building, an all-out war between the Kifuken and the flesh eaters breaks loose, and after seeing their fellow warriors give it their all, Kazuma and Rie decide that they're going to get off the helicopter so that they can get into the mix as well. As all the chaos is going on within the building, Toshihiko tries to escape his bind so that he can go check on Yuka, but much to the man's surprise, Yuka had the same idea in mind, and she pulls up to help him escape. As Yuka is freeing her man, the two of them end up getting jumped by these two Kifuken warriors that charged into the building. But I'm not gonna lie, bro, these two warriors are probably the sorriest fighters in the whole show, bro, because Toshihiko somehow manages to take out both of these so-called warriors while his ass was still 95% immobilized from being tied to the chair. After dropping off their pursuers, the couple makes their way down this corridor trying to escape from the building. But coming down the other end of the corridor is Kazuma, armed with one of the buster suits. And the moment he sees these two running off, Kazuma tries to exact his revenge by shooting at both Toshihiko and his fiance. Now at first things are looking bad, right? I low-key thought Yuka had just ate a couple rounds to the dome, but seemingly out of nowhere, Yuka's ex pulls up on clutch mode and he tanks the bullets that Kazuma had shot before they can hurt Yuka or Toshihiko. Now at first Kazuma's like, fine, you want the smoke, big guy? Come and get it, but via the power of plot armor and good ass timing, Kazuma's flesh eater genes start tweaking out at this very moment, which gives everyone the chance to make their escape while Rie checks to make sure that Kazuma is okay. The ex-boyfriend leads Yuka and Toshihiko to a bathroom where there's a secret escape chute that they can use to leave the building. After seeing Toshihiko fighting on the flesh eater's side, the ex has become both fond of Toshihiko and trusting of him with the woman that he still holds feelings for. As he gives Toshi back his katana that he had confiscated earlier, the man sort of jokingly asks which of them he thinks the baby belongs to, and when Toshi looks back at him with a confused expression, the man gestures to reveal that Yuka is pregnant and that he doesn't know if the kid is his or Toshihiko's. Toshihiko is obviously shocked by this revelation, but the two of them don't have much time to discuss the matter before him and Yuka have to escape down the chute. Mere moments after the couple manages to escape, 𝙏𝙧 comes around the corner and confronts the ex. Apparently these two know each other somehow. I guess they have history or something. But as the ex squares up and gets ready to buy Yuka and Toshihiko some more time to flee, 𝙏𝙧 slowly removes the gloves that he's been wearing the whole show, revealing these suspiciously feminine phalanges that he was hiding beneath the gloves. We jump forward in time a bit and we're once again with Yuka and Toshihiko as they make their way through this random desert that they somehow managed to travel to. For the first time since the amusement park, neither of their lives are in immediate imminent danger, and so with this little bit of spare time that they have, Yuka starts pressing the shit out of Toshihiko. She's like, oh, so we like cheating now? Huh? That's what we're doing? And Toshihiko's just kind of like a little dismissive of her concerns. Like, the nigga's kind of a jerk, especially considering, you know, what he did with Rie. The two of them eventually end up running into this elderly couple who offers to give them a ride, and for the rest of the episode, we basically watch as Yuka and Toshihiko interact with this elderly couple. The elderly couple is like this very sweet, very very supportive, very healthy couple, and after seeing how good their relationship is, Yuka and Toshihiko decide that they want their relationship to be more like that as opposed to whatever it is they have going on right now. They have a discussion about Yuka's pregnancy and sort of like the uncertainty of it all. And despite all the turmoil that has gone on in their relationship up until now, Toshihiko promises Yuka that he'll be there for her and the baby, even if the baby does end up being a flesh eater as opposed to a human. Now, one thing that's important to note about Granny and Gramps over here is that both of them are suffering from their own separate disabilities. Granny has gone blind with old age, and Gramps is like semi-paralyzed due to a work accident from back in the day. Part of the reason that these two work so well together is because they pick up each other's slack, right? They help each other do the things that their disabilities won't let them do on their own. As nightfall comes and everyone starts setting up camp, a mysterious man approaches Granny and offers her a miracle drug that he claims can cure her husband's afflictions. Yeah, this drug ends up turning them both into flesh eaters because of course it does, bro. What makes you think that we would suddenly get a non-tragic healthy relationship in Kemonozume? As flesh eaters, Granny and Gramps go berserk, trying to maul one another. Toshi tries to step in and stop them, but thanks to his dookie boy tendencies, he's unable to do so before Yuka has to turn into a flesh eater and start devouring Granny out of self-defense. When everything finally calms down a bit and Yuka gets a look at what she did to Granny, she's terrified of the carnage that she caused, and she once again sinks into self-hatred and despair before running off. Yuka ends up running off into the woods, basically in a daze by how upset she is with the whole situation. As Yuka is walking through the woods trying to figure out what she's gonna do next, the boy 𝙏𝙖𝙡 pops up out of nowhere in a creepy ass clown fit, bruh, and yeah, I think you can see where this is going. 𝙏𝙧 proceeds to kidnap Yuka, leaving Toshihiko stranded and alone in the middle of nowhere. After hours and hours of searching to no avail, Toshihiko stops at a convenience store in order to rest up before continuing his tireless search for Yuka. While he's in this convenience store, the man ends up getting approached by 𝙏𝙧, who honestly just starts mocking him for his failure to protect Yuka. And bear in mind, Yuka is still locked up in the back of 𝙏𝙧's car, which is sitting right outside the door of the convenience store. In typical main villain fashion, 𝙏𝙧 explains his master plan along with the reason as to why he captured Yuka in the first place. You see, Yuka is a pure-blooded flesh eater, and in order to keep producing his medicine, which has now reached a point where it's literally being sold over the counter in convenience stores like this one, 𝙏𝙧 needs a constantly flowing stream of flesh eaters that he can dissect and dismember to make the medicine's formula. However, in the current day, there are only so many flesh eaters that are still ripe for the picking. Like, their numbers are rapidly declining, and so in order to ensure that he always has a fresh batch of flesh eaters, 𝙏𝙧 gave the medicine itself a side effect where it'll turn a certain portion of those who eat it into flesh eaters. In other words, the medicine creates this self-fulfilling loop of getting people addicted and then turning a portion of those addicts into flesh eaters who will then be hunted by the Kifukin, who he also controls now, in order to make more medicine, which will get people addicted and then they turn into flesh eaters, so on and so forth. Toshihiko tries to attack 𝙏𝙧 in order to free Yuka, but upon doing so, 𝙏𝙧 reveals his ace card and his hands expand into giant flesh eater claws that send Toshihiko flying. Turns out, 𝙏𝙧 has also mastered the Kemonozume technique by replacing his arms with the arms of a flesh eater way back in the day. But it wasn't just any old pair of flesh eater arms that 𝙏𝙧 attached to his body. This vile ass creep has Harumi's arms attached to his body, and he's been using them as his own ever since he burnt down the Kifukin on that one fateful night. 𝙏𝙧's about 2 seconds away from murdering Toshihiko in cold blood when he suddenly gets interrupted by a phone call that summons him elsewhere. As 𝙏𝙧 goes to attend to this call, for some reason he decides to let Toshihiko live, which, like, sure, I guess. Like, I suppose he didn't know that Toshihiko was the main character. I mean, 𝙏𝙧 does actually think that he's the main character of the show on like some fourth wall breaking shit. But after 𝙏𝙧 leaves, Toshihiko gets picked up by Saiji from earlier, who proceeds to reveal that 𝙏𝙧 is actually his father, and that even though he wanted to help Toshihiko stop him, he knew that he was no match for his pops. We cut back to the Kifukin dojo where Rie and the boys are currently having a dinner that she cooked up for all of them. When the woman notices that Kazuma isn't at the table for dinner, she starts to get concerned, and so she makes her way over to his room to go check on him, you know, to make sure he hasn't gone full-on flesh eater or whatever. In his room, Kazuma is on the phone with 𝙏𝙧, who once again is becoming more and more aggressive with his attempt to usurp control of the Kifuken dojo. And over the next few days, 𝙏𝙖 basically uses the power of money and bureaucracy to gut the Kifuken of all of its members and resources until the only people left at the dojo are Kazuma, 𝙏𝙖, Morty, and this one other nigga named Knife who we haven't really talked about yet. And I mean, look bro, we're not going to start talking about him now. Once he's 100% certain that Kazuma has hit rock bottom, 𝙏𝙖 pulls up at the Kifuken dojo for the sole purpose of pouring salt on Kazuma's wounds. And when Kazuma tries to swing on 𝙏𝙖 in order to defend the honor of his dojo, 𝙏𝙖 one-shots that boy in front of his homies. And in front of the hoes, bruh. It's like at this point, Kazuma simply can't catch a break. Once Kazuma is down, 𝙏𝙖 turns his attention to 𝙏𝙖. He's like, look, 𝙏𝙖, I'm gonna be 100% honest with you right now. He's not being 100% honest right now. I mean, of course, he's not. Have you seen his track record so far? But he's like, look, 𝙏𝙖, if you really want the strength to defend the honor of the Kifuken, then come by my lab and we can hook you up with some flesh eater arms so that you can have as much power as I do. 𝙏𝙖 is hesitant about this offer at first, rightfully so, but the more she thinks about it, the more desperate she becomes. And as the day goes on, she starts putting some serious thought into attempting the Kemonozume so that she can protect the dojo that she loves so deeply. While all this is going down at the dojo, Toshihiko is spending his day training with the monkey as he prepares to attempt to rescue Yuka. After training, Toshi and Saiji stop at a local restaurant to replenish. And while at this restaurant, Toshihiko, a bit overwhelmed by his situation, prays up to his late father, asking for guidance and advice on exactly what to do. To the surprise of me, Toshihiko's father actually does respond to Toshihiko's prayer. He does so by possessing a dead fish that's on Saiji's plate, or maybe Toshihiko has finally lost his marbles and it's all in his head. I mean, honestly, that's probably the most likely answer. But while Saiji and Toshi are talking, Saiji reveals that Jin, the third musketeer and Rie's father, is actually still alive. And upon hearing this, Toshihiko gets excited because he thinks that if him, Saiji, and Jin all team up together, they may have enough power to take down 𝙏𝙖. The next day, 𝙏𝙖 decides to take the leap of faith and go through with the deal that 𝙏𝙖 had offered her back at the dojo. You see, the night prior, Kazuma had like a panic attack in the shower that 𝙏𝙖 had to calm him down from. And after seeing how much losing the Kifuken was affecting Kazuma, 𝙏𝙖 once again decided to take matters into her own hands, and she makes her way over to 𝙏𝙖's research lab so that she can attempt the Kemonozume. As 𝙏𝙖 is getting ready for the operation, Toshihiko calls her and he's like, hey, 𝙏𝙖, I know we're not on the best of terms right now, but I need you to stay away from 𝙏𝙖 at all costs. Like, bro is not to be trusted. 𝙏𝙖 already has her mind set on attempting the Kemonozume though, and so after hanging up on Toshihiko, she makes her way over to the operation room where 𝙏𝙖 replaces her human arms with the arms that used to belong to Yuka's ex-boyfriend. Now at first it's looking like 𝙏𝙖 might actually have enough mental fortitude to withstand the Kemonozume and become a claw user, but with the help of some drugs and a little bit of manipulation, 𝙏𝙖 is able to mess with 𝙏𝙖's mental state while her body is still trying to integrate the claws, and in doing so he basically causes her to fail the Kemonozume and become a raging flesh eater. Once 𝙏𝙖 is transformed, 𝙏𝙖 makes his way up to Yuka, who he's still holding hostage. After pumping her full of the same drug that the Kifuken used to make her transform way back on the day of the funeral, Yuka also goes into flesh eater mode despite not wanting to. And after both of these two women have turned into full-on flesh eaters, 𝙏𝙖 drops them both in this Coliseum room that he plans on using to have them duke it out for Toshihiko's love. Well, they're actually not duking it out for Toshihiko's love. 𝙏𝙖 makes that much clear by literally breaking the fourth wall and telling this to the audience. But come to find out, 𝙏𝙖's actual plan is to take the arms of whoever wins this bout and give them to his son, Saiji, who, like, let's be so for real right now, bro. The nigga's already a whole giant and a claw user. Does he really need a more OP set of claws on top of what he already has? Anywho, Saiji isn't really fucking with his pops' villainous plans, and so when he gets a call from 𝙏𝙖 saying that he found some new arms, Saiji basically denies his dad and continues to make his way over to the building with Toshihiko and the monkey so that they can continue their mission of putting an end to 𝙏𝙖's villainous ways. Meanwhile, back at the dojo, Kazuma is flipping the absolute fuck out after finding concrete evidence that he is in fact the son of a flesh eater. Up until now, Kazuma had no idea why his body had been transforming, but after finding Juzo's secret room that 𝙏𝙖 had found earlier and learning about his true flesh eater nature, Kazuma feels that his entire life up to that point has been a lie, which, well, to an extent, it kinda was. Anywho, Kazuma's tweaking only serves to make him transform into a flesh eater even quicker. And that night, when the one dude that we haven't talked about yet, Knife, goes outside to check on Kazuma, he finds Kazuma has damn near fully transformed into a flesh eater, and he's just out there begging to be killed right then and there. He no longer wants to live this life if he has to live it as one of the creatures that he hates the most in this world. Yeah, Kazuma ends up eating the dude that he asked to come kill him, so rest in peace to Knife, I guess. Now you see why I didn't really want to bring him up like that. Now, one thing that I haven't really touched on that much throughout the course of this video is the overall state of the world that this story is taking place in. Granted, the show itself doesn't really spend all that much time exploring like the grander world that exists here. Like, it's mainly focused on our small cast of characters and the drama that takes place amongst them. But in the backdrop of everything that we've talked about so far, people randomly turning into flesh eaters because of 𝙏𝙖𝙡's medicine is becoming more and more of a problem. And it all kind of reaches a tipping point when this government official gets gunned down by the military after they think he's about to transform into a flesh eater. Again, not that important to the story as a whole, but I just wanted to put that out there so that y'all could understand how serious this synthetic flesh eater problem is starting to become. Anywho, we cut back to Saiji and Toshi, who are currently in the process of trying to recruit Jin to help take out 𝙏𝙧. However, with no arms left and a very deteriorated mental state, Jin is in no condition to fight against 𝙏𝙧, and so he ultimately decides to stay at the crib and play video games, while our two heroes go out there and risk it all to save his daughter. While Toshi and Saiji get ready to make their way to 𝙏𝙧's lab, Kazuma is also making his way to the lab in hopes of saving Rie, who he loves, by the way. But unlike Toshi and Saiji, who are trying to come up with an actual tactical plan that they can use to defeat 𝙏𝙧, Kazuma charges into 𝙏𝙧's lair with reckless abandon. Nothing but a sword and a dream, bro. Needless to say, 𝙏𝙧 isn't really the type of villain you want to just pull up on without any sort of plan. And so when Kazuma finally does reach 𝙏𝙧's lair, the man already has a trap set up that he can use to shatter whatever little bit of sanity that Kazuma has left. A chute opens up from the floor above the one that Kazuma is on, and from this chute falls Rie's almost dead body. Apparently, she had lost the little Coliseum flesh eater match that she had been forced into against Yuka. And in 𝙏𝙧's mind, if the woman wasn't strong enough to take down Yuka, then the only valid usage for her now was as a pawn to take down Kazuma. Upon seeing the woman that he loves basically dying in his arms, Kazuma starts breaking down even further. He starts transforming into a flesh eater, and when he finally does come back down to his senses after inadvertently going flesh eater mode, Kazuma finds that he had been unwittingly feasting on Rie. I guess the scent of her blood had like overtaken his flesh eater instincts or something, I don't know. Now at this point, Kazuma has lost it all, right? His friends, his family, his girl, and most of it can be traced back to 𝙏𝙧 and himself, I guess, if you really want to get technical with it. But seeing no other way forward after losing Rie, Kazuma says fuck it all, bruh, and he starts to run up to the top floor of the building bare booty naked. In his mind, if he's already lost everything that he has to live for, then he might as well go out crazy and take 𝙏𝙧 with him on the way out. Kazuma does not go crazy or take 𝙏𝙧 with him on the way out. After killing Kazuma with the very buster suit that he invented, 𝙏𝙧 steals Kazuma's flesh eater claws and implements them into his legs, giving himself what is essentially a double Kemonozume power. And yeah, for those of you who haven't been keeping track, this loss right here actually does cement Kazuma as the sorriest character in the entire show, with a grand total of 0 wins, 4 losses, 1 bankruptcy, and 1 fumble. So yeah, that nigga sucks. After deciding that he's had enough petty fun for now, 𝙏𝙧 decides to hack the entire world's broadcast system and reveal to them his master plan. Apparently, he wants to turn everyone into a flesh eater and return things back to the way that they once were on Earth. Come to find out, lore dump time, in this verse, the original flesh eaters were actually the dinosaurs, and so yeah, I guess 𝙏𝙧 wants to bring about a second dinosaur age or something. As 𝙏𝙧 is doing his villain shit, broadcasting his master plan across the globe, Toshihiko, Saiji, and the monkey, why the fuck is the monkey here? But Toshihiko, Saiji, and the monkey all make their way up to the top floor where they find Kazuma's armless corpse. Upon seeing that he didn't arrive in time to save his brother, Toshihiko grieves for just a second before deciding to lock in and finally deliver 𝙏𝙖 the divine retribution that he deserves for all of his devious deeds. Now, just a fair warning before we get into the contents of this last episode, because we're on the last episode now, by the way. Hooray, you made it to the end. But just a fair warning before we really get into this last episode, the contents of this episode are just fucking confusing, man. Like, I really don't know what else to say. Like, don't get me wrong, the whole show has been weird up to this point. I don't think that there's any denying that fact, but like this last episode in particular just ramps up the weirdness scale to 100, and like, yeah, I really don't know what else to tell you, bruh. But with all that said, I bring to you all the grand finale of Kemonozume. Now let's start off by talking about Jin. You see, Jin, despite having denied Toshihiko's offer to team up earlier, has a sudden change of heart after seeing that 𝙏𝙖 is making an attempt to take over the world. We get a look at Jin, who's donned his old Kifuken warrior outfit, and somehow the old man has snuck into 𝙏𝙖's lair, where he reveals that 𝙏𝙖 has an entire secret lab of Harumi clones that are just kinda chilling there, mindlessly waiting to be put to use. We cut back to the upper floor of the lair, and Toshihiko is currently getting attacked by Yuka, who is still under 𝙏𝙖's command, but by tanking one of the woman's attacks and giving her a kiss, or, well, I guess it was more of a violent bite on the lips, but by doing this, Toshihiko is able to calm down Yuka so that she transforms back into her human mode. Once Yuka is calm, Toshihiko starts trying to 1v1 𝙏𝙖, but after a few seconds of going back and forth, 𝙏𝙖 ends up overpowering Toshihiko, and he cuts off his sword-wielding arm so that he can no longer fight. Now, at first, I'm sitting here watching this and I'm like, yeah, that's GG, 𝙏𝙖 won the squabble. But by picking up his own arm that's still wrapped around the sword, Toshihiko is able to sneak attack 𝙏𝙖 and slice his head clean off his body, delivering what I thought would be the finishing blow. Now, this is when things start to get really weird. Somehow 𝙏𝙖 is able to survive as a disembodied head. Don't ask me how the fuck he's able to do this. He just is. But after transforming into nothing more than a head with legs, 𝙏𝙖 escapes from Toshihiko by running out the roof of the building, and he continues on with his plan to roll a giant bomb down into the city that'll turn everybody into flesh eaters upon detonation. Now, 𝙏𝙖 actually intended to lock Toshihiko and Yuka inside of this building so that he could carry out his plan uninterrupted, but in a rather symbolic last act of love, Rei's human arm that 𝙏𝙖 had stolen props the door open for Toshihiko and Yuka, allowing them to make their way outside the building and continue to fight against 𝙏𝙖. R.I.P. to Rie, man. Shout out to baddie, bruh. I mean, she was crazy for the whole cheating thing, but still, R.I.P. bruh. Anywho, by the time they get outside, the bomb has already started rolling towards the city, and there's not much that they can do to stop it. Fortunately for them though, Saiji has finally decided to stand up to his father, and the titan of a man proceeds to grab 𝙏𝙖's head and beam it back in the direction of the building that they're standing on. With the help of the monkey, shout out my goat, they're able to pop 𝙏𝙖's eyeball out of its socket and use it to activate a retinal scanner that cancels the bomb's detonation. After his big giant flesh eater bomb is no longer a threat, 𝙏𝙖 says fuck it and suddenly transforms into this giant eldritch monster that grabs Toshihiko and starts jostling him back and forth in hopes of killing him. Upon seeing her boyfriend about to die, Yuka grabs Toshihiko's sword and starts begging him to use her arms to do the Kemonozume, but Toshihiko doesn't want to make the same mistake that everyone else has made so far, and so he refuses to follow through with her request. Both Yuka and 𝙏𝙖 start trying to push Toshihiko to do the Kemonozume. Yuka because she doesn't want to see Toshihiko die, and 𝙏𝙖 because he's just a sadistic freak of nature that wants to see everyone's lives ruined and wants to see everyone become a flesh eater. Yuka actually grabs Toshihiko's sword and starts trying to cut off her own arms, but when the monkey sees her doing this, shout out my goat, he takes the sword from her, which forces her to come up with a different plan to stop 𝙏𝙖. Alright, now hopefully you've been able to follow everything that's happened so far, because what we're about to do now is really kick things into gear and ascend to the third and final level of weirdness that this fight takes on. Yuka suddenly starts role-playing as her mother. She pretends to be Harumi, and 𝙏𝙖, who had secretly been madly in love with Harumi since way back in the day, starts tweaking, bro. He actually starts seeing Yuka as Harumi, and he puts down Toshihiko as he goes to kiss, quote unquote, Harumi. Once he gets close enough, Yuka slashes 𝙏𝙖 twice with Toshihiko's sword, but because she has no sword training, this only ends up making 𝙏𝙖 even angrier, and he once again picks up Toshihiko, this time trying to kill him as he takes on the form of Harumi as she appears in Toshihiko's memories. For a while, Toshihiko is about to pass out, relenting himself to death, but at the very last second, he once again locks in and he bites down on 𝙏𝙧's flesh that's surrounding him, which forces 𝙏𝙧 to let go of him and drop him back down to the surface. Turns out, Toshihiko had been wearing the diaper that Yuka got him on her birthday. I don't know why they decided to give us that detail, but look bro, I'm just the messenger. To the surprise of literally everyone in this fight, Jin pops up on the roof of the building to square up with 𝙏𝙧. Again, this is the same man that had vehemently refused to do so earlier, and so I don't really know what made Jin change his mind, but I'm glad he did, because Jin came up here with the clutchest plan I've ever seen in my life, bro. Turns out, Jin bought all the Harume clones from 𝙏𝙧's lab up here with them, and when the unstable eldritch supervillain sees like 50 copies of the woman that he's infatuated with all stumbling towards him, he loses himself in their quote-unquote love, or at least the love that he wishes he had. The mindless clones proceed to start devouring 𝙏𝙧, which, again, crazy, but at the very last second, 𝙏𝙧 escapes by growing these bat wings and flying off with just his head once again. Toshi isn't going to let 𝙏𝙧 get away this time though, and so as the man is flying off, Toshihiko jumps off the building with him and latches onto him so that he can't escape. 𝙏𝙧 tries to fly Toshihiko all the way up to space in order to suffocate him or freeze him and ultimately kill him, but at the very last second, right before he's about to go out, Toshihiko bites off 𝙏𝙧's wings and sends them both plummeting back down to the planet below. Now at first 𝙏𝙧's like, oh well, stupid ass nigga, we'll just both die together. But as 𝙏𝙧 was flying up to space, Morty, who was watching this all from the dojo, calls Yuka so that she knew the timing in which to catch Toshihiko. And at the end of their squabble, Toshihiko is saved by the people that love him, while 𝙏𝙧, who had turned his back on everyone he was close to, dies unceremoniously with no one to help him. The US government then proceeds to use a giant fucking satellite laser to blow up 𝙏𝙧's entire lab because yeah, sure bro, why the fuck not? The show is already over anyway, you might as well go out balls to the wall if I'm being honest right now. In the final scene of the show, we see a jet soaring through the air. Aboard this jet is Jin, the monkey, Saiji, Toshi, and Yuka. When Toshihiko finally awakens, Yuka begins to apologize for what she's about to do before once again hitting Toshihiko with the paralysis technique. While Toshihiko is frozen, unable to move, Yuka once again tries to run away from him by skydiving out the plane. She doesn't want to be a continuous source of pain in his life, but come to find out, Toshihiko was actually faking the paralysis this time, and he proceeds to skydive after Yuka with no parachute, showing that after all they've been through, he trusts her with his literal life. Toshihiko promises Yuka that no matter how much pain her being a flesh eater may bring to his life, that he'll love her regardless. And after sealing their engagement with a kiss and a ring, we fade to credits. Kemonozume, ladies and gentlemen.